they're lively and they're just so inquisitive. So thank you very much that you appreciate this question so high. But okay, so um, Carol, who are you and well, what's important to know about you?
Hmm. They say, if you believe in reincarnation, that when you're on the other side, you select certain problems that you're going to work on in the upcoming lifetime. And when you're on the other side, they say, the problems don't seem so difficult. Oh, I'll take one of these and I'll take one of those, and I'll work on all of these things in this current lifetime. It's not going to be so bad. Then you get here. Well, my questions, there are two. The first one is, why me? And the second is, what does having synesthesia mean? So those have been the questions that have never been answered, and they've been asked 1,000 different ways to many people. They remain unanswered. So I'm assuming when I get back to the origin place on the other side, somebody will tell me. All I know is that when I was 7, I lost my best friend because I told her the color of the letter A. And from that, I learned that silence was safer. And I didn't speak of it until I was 20. And I was home from a college break on a semester, sitting around the dinner table in Detroit with my family, my mother, my father, my brother, just the four of us. And my father was an artist, so we talked about anything, everything. I don't know why I said it. The number 5 I announced is yellow. And my father said, just like that, no, it's yellow ochre. And two things happened instantaneously. One, I was no longer alone. And two, maybe he could answer this question, which was currently bothering me, which was, is number 2 green or blue? I couldn't figure it out because number 2 and number 6 were equal in their lightness, but one was green and one was blue, and I didn't know. So I thought I could ask my father. Well, he didn't look at the expression on my mother and brother's faces. They were, oh, this is a new game. What are the rules? Sounds like fun. He didn't see that. I did. And I snuck in this question quickly. And he said, 2 is green. I said, thank you. And by this time, he realized what he was revealing, because my father was born of English parents and raised in Canada and very reticent. It was okay to talk about business. It was okay to talk about his sculpture. It was okay to talk about his golf game, but nothing else. And this had broached that nothing else thing. My life has been a trail of breadcrumbs. It's been hints. I remember being somewhere in my teens, sitting in a chair and thinking, as I did for many, many years of my life, because it took me until I was 49 to find out anything about synesthesia. And part of me would think of questions that might direct me to an answer. This was before the internet. I don't look at Anton, I'm 80 years old. So for 73 years of my life, I've been chasing the question, what does this mean? And the other question, why me? And the driving force has always been to not be alone, to find others I could talk to, people who knew more than I did.
And what were your first recollections of when you first experienced synesthesia?
When I was 4, my mother had a body lotion that was scented, and it was called aquamarine. And I would smell this body lotion, and I would think, It's so appropriately named because the scent is the color of aquamarine. Do you know the color? It's a very pale blue, turquoisey kind of blue, translucent. So I remember that. And of course, numbers and letters in color, though when I was 7, not all of them were in color. It took a few years. And there's still a couple that I'm debating. They just haven't revealed themselves.
How did you come to know about synesthesia as a scientific studied phenomenon?
I was invited to teach as a visiting artist at the University of Michigan. I believe it was 1975. And there was a tea for the new faculty. And I always liked psychologists because I thought they knew things. And they were people that I could talk to. And at this tea, I met a psychologist, just as new to the campus as I was. And I told her about colored letters. She said, it's got a name. And that was the first time I knew that it had a name. I mean, I knew because of my father that I wasn't alone. That's all I knew. So I had been given a dictionary when I graduated from high school. So I went to that dictionary, which I still have, and I looked up the word synesthesia, and there it was, except that it only explained about colored music. It had nothing to say about colored letters. But I had a word. And I remember another person that I knew, also a psychologist. She was getting her PhD at Columbia University. By that time, I had moved from Detroit to New York. I moved here in 74. And she said, let's go to Columbia. Let's go into the stacks and see if we can find if there's any information whatsoever on synesthesia. And we did. And it was a research document that you couldn't take out of the library. They had a Xerox machine. The Xerox machine wanted 5 cents a page. They wanted a nickel. I had some dollars, and I stood in the lobby close to the Xerox machine with the dollar in my hand, just like this, and saying, $1 for as many nickels as you have. And I finally got 63 nickels, and I Xeroxed the thing. And I came home, and I sat in my favorite chair with a pen to underline things. And there was so much information, but I didn't agree with a lot of it. And so I'm writing question marks in the margins. Let me see if I can find that. 1 second. And you can see
These are the copies, yes.
the copy I made. The synesthesia of a blind subject. So I sat there and I went through this. And I'm reading. I'd get to a section and mark it. I'd get to another section with question marks. And I went
Right.
through the whole thing. And that's when I learned that there was a lot of information there. But that was my only source. This was before the internet, long before the internet. And I didn't know people. I didn't know who to talk to. But I had this, and it was a beginning.
And what changes did it trigger in you when you came to know about synesthesia?
I was still silent about it. I was still shy. I still didn't have anybody I could talk to. I didn't have any facts. I didn't have any knowledge. I didn't have any sanctions. So still silence was safer for me. But I started to look. Every once in a while in my lifetime, if I was with people that I thought might understand, I'd share my secret. And I'd say, colored letters, do you have it? Looking for that echo. But I never heard the echo of, oh, I do that too. I never heard it. One day, it was August 31st, 1993, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm sitting, it's a summer job, and I'm being paid a lot of money per hour for my sculpting skills. I was working for a company that took licensed characters and sculpted them, and the prototypes were then sent to China for mass production in millions. I always listened to music. Music was in color. But that particular day, my Walkman, my cassette player, the batteries died. So I didn't take it into work with me. There were 4 of us, 4 women sitting in a cubicle, passing around these sculpts. You work on it for a while, you get tired of working on Bugs Bunny. Okay, I'll trade you Bugs Bunny for Wile E. Coyote. And you work on those, and you're doing very precision work. So sometimes we'd talk, sometimes we'd listen to whatever music or talk radio was going on. The woman sitting next to me always listened to National Public Radio. And Tamra suddenly was very alert. I had asked everybody in our cubicle, colored letters, anybody? No response. But they had a name, because I could say synesthesia now, because I had the name. Tamara turns to the woman sitting behind me, Lisa, takes the headset off Lisa's head, which startled Lisa, put it on my head, which startled me, with the explanation, Carol has to hear this. Richard Saitoic had done an interview about his book, the first one that came out, which was The Man Who Tasted Chips. And I'm being paid a lot of money per hour for my sculpting skills. The announcer introduced synesthesia, introduced Richard Saitoic, and I started to cry. When you're crying, you can't see. So I couldn't sculpt. So I put my head down, pretending like I was working. And I listened. And about 20 minutes later, when it was over, I picked my head up and I thought, I got away with it. They won't know. Well, what had happened was, it was like a blast that went through the entire studio, the painters, the sculptors, the people that had digital skills, which were in their infancy, everybody in the whole studio, 20 people had gathered around, and everybody was looking at me. I hadn't got away with anything. And they all had the same expression on their face, which was, in effect, we know your life has just changed. We don't know how, but we know that something really tremendous has happened. In the meantime, I'm thinking, I won't charge them for the time that I wasn't working. And then I thought, I have to get back to work. But then I thought, what's 5 more minutes? There was a phone in our cubicle, and I dialed the radio station and said, could I speak to Richard Saitoic? And they said, oh, we're really sorry. It was a taped interview. But they were kind. And they gave me his publicist's phone number. And I thought, what's 5 more minutes? I won't charge them for the whole hour. So I made another phone call, and I get the agent on the phone, and I said, I'm a synesthete. And she said, oh, no, dear, you can't be. It's very rare. And I'm going, but I am. She was kind. she took my phone number and she passed it on to Richard. And 2 weeks later, he called me. Now, in New York, we interrupt each other incessantly. It's perfectly okay in New York. Everywhere else in the world, you're really crude and you're very rude. But in New York, we do that. Well, he was calling me from where he lived in Washington, D.C. And we spoke for about 20 minutes. And I promise you, he didn't get one complete sentence out. Not one. He got interrupted every single thing he said because the lifetime of unanswered questions, the questions that I tried to erase, the things that I wanted out of my life because they had no answers. Those questions never went away. You can silence yourself, but it doesn't change you. And he was able to answer questions. And it was the first time that anybody knew more about synesthesia than I did. And frankly, I didn't know much. Not much. So that was the beginning of knowledge. But my life from 4 years old, smelling my mother's scented body lotion, to losing my best friend because the letter A for me was pink and she didn't think that letters should have colors, to my father being startled into an admission that under normal circumstances he would never have made. As a matter of fact, it took me 30 years before he would even discuss it. To people I just knew, different psychologists who had access to information I didn't have. One gave me the name, one took me down to the stacks of Columbia, and I discovered the synesthesia of a blind subject. To Richard Saitoic, and then through Richard, I met other people. Richard gave me my freedom. They say knowledge is power. In my case, knowledge was freedom. And other things happened, like one day I had been looking at one of Richard's books and I came across the form constants, Kluver's form constants. And this one piece that I did, I stumbled on it in my storage closet while I'm looking for a painting. And I thought, this is a Kluver form constant. It's classic. It's just a comma shape. Perfect. And then I thought, let me go back into my studio and see if I've used these things. And I was just absolutely dumbstruck because it was in all of my paintings. It was in all of my work, all the Kluver form constants. I had no conscious awareness of any of it, but I was using it. And that too was freedom, because then I realized what I was doing and I could use it and did use it. And for many years, it informed the next artwork that I did, where I was trying to show people what synesthesia looked like.
And how did your style develop from early years to where you're now? I mean, in terms of manner, in terms of media, and in terms of subject matter, how did you develop as an artist?
By breaking rules. I broke every rule I could find, not to be difficult, but because the rules didn't work. I had a very formal, traditional art education. And I was told what I could do and what I couldn't do. I could work from portraiture, I could work from creatures, I could work from landscapes, I could work from body movements, gestural things. I could work from isms, cubism, surrealism. I could work from intellectual things. I could work from dream states. I could work from all of these traditional things, but what wasn't included was synesthesia. And if you have a synesthetic vision and you try to capture it using the tools, the techniques, the materials of traditional art making, you soon realize you can't do it. It's not possible. Like if you hear a sound, that sound is there for as long as it lasts, which is fractions of seconds sometimes. And so the color that is with it and its shape and its movement are fleeting. You don't have time to take brushes and mix your colors to match it and then apply it to the paper or to the canvas. You don't have time. It's so long gone by then. So you take the tubes of paint and you put gloves on your hands and you squeeze the paint into your hands and it goes onto the canvas as fast as you could possibly move. This is breaking every single rule. You're not mixing the paint. You're not adding things to it for different drying purposes or thinning of it. You're not even using brushes. You're breaking the rules because you have to. And my work has always been like that. It's like, I have the vision. How do I capture it? What tool, what material is best going to show the viewer what it is I'm trying to say? Because there are two parts to making art, and you're not in control of any of them. The first part is you think you're controlling the art as you're making it. You're not. You're just not. And the second part is you can't make anybody like your work. The audience chooses you. So you work for yourself and you hope that the audience that you'd like to attract is the one that you reach. But most often, I've always been surprised who likes my work. I can't control that. I'm just startled, but I work for me and I work for the truth and the rawness of the visions. And now what I'm doing is I'm not interested in, this is the sound of a wolf, or this is the sound of a human imitating a wolf's call. This is what it looks like. I'm not interested in showing that I've done it. Now my work is about all the experiences that I might have in one day. All the synesthetic things, and they go into one painting. And the paintings now have become a diary, a visual diary of experiences.
You describe yourself as a realist, which in a way you are. Where do you stand? Is it still abstraction or is it physiological realism?
So it never was abstraction. And abstract is to reduce to its essential parts something much larger. And abstract is to change something, to distill it. What I'm painting is not a distillation, it is the actual experience. Therefore, what I'm doing isn't abstract, it is real. But it's a reality that nobody else can see. And so my job is to make it visible to others in the hopes that this question could be answered. And the question is, do you see what I see? And by sharing visuals with other people who can create visuals, I begin to understand if what I'm seeing is unique to me or if there are commonalities. And I begin to understand how broad the range is of what we synesthetes actually see. Because we've always been dependent on things like Kluver's interpretations of the form constants. But are they true? Is this what other synesthetes see? And the line drawings leave so much out. You don't see the color, you don't see the shape, you don't see how it moves, you don't see how these things work in connection with other shapes when shapes are here and then they're changing, and when they leave, where do they go? And how long is the time before something else comes in? And what is the trigger that's causing this to happen? There's so many factors that you try to put together to try to understand, do you see what I see? Is this happening for you the same way it's happening for me? So I write about certain things, but I'm constantly looking for other people who have the same reactions. And I've had other kinds of visions, you know, about the hypnagogic ones. Well, here's a story for you. And this one's brand new, and I'm going to talk about it at Oxford a little bit. The difference between hypnagogia and synesthesia, in my experience, is that there's a trigger for synesthesia, but there was never a trigger for hypnagogia. One day in 2013, Peter Brook, the famous playwright who died in 2022 in the summer, he said, I'm doing a play called Valley of Astonishment about people who see the world differently and go through hell for a glimpse of paradise. And I'd like to talk to you about synesthesia. And I'm calling the play Valley of Astonishment. And he said, Valley of Astonishment is the sixth valley in the Sufi classic written in 1177 called Conference of the Birds. The story of Conference of the Birds is it's a parable, and this bird, actually a hoopoe, gets together with all these other birds and says, we're going to go on a pilgrimage to find God, but I have to warn you that this pilgrimage is dangerous, it's arduous, and there are 7 valleys you must pass through, and each one is more difficult than the previous. Many of you will die. And the birds are going, you know, I like my cage. I'm safe. There can be food, there can be water, they open the door, I can fly around. What do I need to go and put my life in jeopardy for? Forget it. But in the end, 30 birds go with him. Well, the 6th valley is called the Valley of Astonishment and Bewilderment. So I'm talking to Peter, and I've read the book now, and it's 2 weeks have passed. And I go to sleep, and I can't fall asleep because when I shut my eyes, these visions just keep popping. Boom, 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 so fast, so much faster than anything I see synesthetically. And I'm lying there, and my eyes are shut, and the only way to stop the visions is to open them, and I can't figure out, how do you fall asleep with your eyes open? But eventually you just get so exhausted that you do. I'm not 7 years old anymore. And I know scientists, so I contacted 4 people I knew. And I said, what's going on? What is this? Well, one of the people I contacted was Jules. She said, well, these are called hypnagogic visions. And yeah, it's supposed to happen. A lot of people get them. It's between being awake and falling asleep. But I don't understand, she said, why you're seeing them in the shower. Well, I didn't understand that either. Larry Marks warned me. He said, there's a book that psychiatrists use. It's called Diagnostic DSM for short. And it describes for psychiatrists how crazy you are and what form of crazy you have and to what degree. He said, well, it's called hypnagogic hallucinations. And I'm telling you that because I don't want you to be blindsided. He was a good friend. The third person I talked to was Daphne Moore, and she said, well, you know, sometimes people who are going blind will see visions. So that sent me to the eye doctor, who said, nothing wrong with your eyes, but your glass prescription needs changing. I'm glad you came in. And the fourth person I talked to was Noam Sagiv. And he said, oh, I see them too. So again, I'm not alone anymore. And now I've had 3 times hypnopomic visions, the ones you get just on waking, and those are terrifying. Those are only black, white, and gray. They're not symmetrical. There's no color, and there's a feeling of such emptiness in them. So I've seen them 3 times. There are 3 different kinds. I'm trying to create them. It's not easy.
You talk to many arts critics, curators, and your peer artists as well. Do you think that synesthesia in other experiences that you've been talking about, like hypnagogy, hypnopompy, and geometric hallucinations, so can they establish a movement, a genre of their own in arts?
For a genre to happen, you have to have a body of work, and it can't just be from one person. You have to find others. That's difficult to do. One of the things I'm concerned about is AI right now. It makes it easy for people who have no artistic skill to go and create something. But just because they create it doesn't mean that there's truth in it. They may be enchanted by something that AI can give them and stick with that. For a genre to happen, there's a lot of research that has to occur. A lot of people have to be working in some sort of direction similar, though they may not know anybody else is doing the same thing. I don't know anybody else is working like I am, but there may be. Just because I don't know it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But how much time do you have in your life? Do you, as an artist, look for commonalities, or do you, as you're taught, try to avoid the commonalities for the sake of originality? Which means that artists are very hesitant to go and look for work that might at all be similar to theirs. It's something to avoid if you want to keep your voice. You look after the body work is done, but not while you're doing it.
Throughout your career, you've been preoccupied with other synesthetes arts, and
Where did you get
especially
that? Oh my God.
Without it. It's so loosely tied to the physical world that it can become attached to the wrong thing. In early childhood, it's not beyond the realms of possibility that the coloured hearing cases are cases where sound information coming in ultimately becomes represented in the same domain as colours.
New York artist Carol Steen uses music to evoke colors to help her when she's working on a composition.
The colors are like gems or like stained glass with really fine light coming in. They're luminous. They're far brighter than anything I can get with paint.
Maybe it's part of a evolutionary beneficial process. The idea that an awful lot of the way in which we personally experience the world is learned early on and is learned in ways that give us each some unique identity. Then in a way it could be the case that we develop different neural structures, or that the differences between us become located or become most exaggerated in specific neural structures. Maybe early learning determines the course in which our personalized perceptions develop. Consequently, you have the possibility that different people will see better ways of going about things. In other words, people with perceptions that are different are more likely to be able to become creative in particular circumstances.
Carol Steen has identified many of the colors she sees in the work of Kandinsky. She has come to the Museum of Modern Art with New York Times art critic Bill Zimmer, who also has colored hearing, to see if he agrees that Kandinsky is a synesthete.
Well, I'm really excited to show you these Kandinskys because I think he's a synesthete, and I think his work is marvelous.
Well, I know that in his writing he equates the sound and color a lot. Talks about them in the same breath. And there's other synesthesia. There's touch. He wrote about texture in his writing. He said, colors have different feels. He said that oranges are prickly, and then he talked about dark ultramarine blues can be smooth like velvet. And then there was this other strange expression. He said, there's a common expression, the scent of colors. And I don't think that's a common expression, but it shows...
The scent of colors? You mean they smelled color?
The smell of color. So I have a feeling he was a total synesthete.
Wouldn't his contemporaries think he was kind of weird?
Not only can Carol see her colours in Kandinsky's work, but Bill can identify the same shapes he sees during synesthesia.
Well, these clouds are certainly similar to the clouds that my shapes are against.
Do you get blacks or do you just get whites?
Whites, and then maybe a little turquoise will come in. This could be my shape. That is the combination of a curved line, a sinuous line, and spikes.
Roger Watt can make sense of the shapes he sees.
Wow. Can you send that to me? I haven't seen Orange Sherbet Kisses in forever, but I do have the transcript of it. That was the first one that came out.
You talked about Kandinsky and Van Gogh and other artists, and those artists do not identify themselves as synesthesia. So beyond hypothesis, what can reveal synesthesia in an artist?
That's one of those fabulous questions you ask. When I look at the work, I know. I look for the cluviform constants. I look for the speed at which the paint may have been applied. I look for the shapes. I look for the colors. In just meeting a person, I wouldn't know. But sometimes in the conversation it would come up. Sometimes I just take a chance and ask. People are pretty good with social skills. People hardly ever make the mistakes that you make when you're 7 years old and you just blunder into something. But I do sense synesthesia in some people, just a sensitivity and awareness, maybe openness, maybe guarded. Depends on the person. But generally in the work, Greta Berman tells me that she can listen to a piece of music and know if the composer is a synesthete. I can't do that because I don't know what I'm looking for, but she seems to sense it. For me, it's visual. I look for the same things that I put in my own work.
Why is it important? Why might it be important to know that this or that artist is a synesthete?
In the case of Charles Birchfield, for whom emotions had shapes and colors, if you're to understand his work, you need to know he painted in code. If you want to understand somebody's work, you have to know as much about them and how they perceive the world as possible. Otherwise, you miss a great deal. So in the case of Birchfield, when he had a retrospective at the famous Whitney Museum here in New York, which was some years ago, the cover illustration was called The Insect Chorus. And in order to understand what that painting was about, you had to know the symbols he was using. And Nancy Weekly, who's the authority on Birchfield, was very kind, and she explained to me what the symbols meant. He was married and he had 5 children, but he never told anybody about his joined senses. But he kept journals, and he told the secrets to his journals. And the Birchfield Penny Art Center has his journals as well as his paintings. So they know. And of his 5 children, one of them is also synesthetic. But when the Whitney Museum was putting together the show, there's a hesitancy to describe somebody as being a synesthete. And I think the hesitancy sometimes comes from the fear that, oh, well, you see these things, therefore that's why you're a painter, that's why you're a sculptor, that's why your work is good, because you have this special gift. And it kind of negates all the years of study and practice and experimentation and all your failures to come up with something. It just kind of makes it seem like, oh, well, it's because you're a synesthete. But synesthesia really doesn't have anything to do with quality. There's certainly a lot of young synesthetic artists and older ones too, who don't have the formal training, who call themselves artists and they think that their work is great. But for those of us who have a really formal education, we don't think it's so great. So just because you do it doesn't mean that you're doing it well. And that's a lot of objection that I have to synesthetes just coming along. And that's probably why David Hockney doesn't want to be identified as a synesthete. But he was identified as a synesthete by Richard Saitok, which is kind of a charming story. Because in 1981, one of the famous art magazines here in the States called Art Forum had done an interview with Hockney, and Hockney had said something that got Richard Saitok very interested. So he sent a letter to Hockney when Hockney had his studio in Los Angeles. And Hockney carried that letter with him for 2 months and finally wrote back to Saitok and said, okay, I'll answer your questions, come out to Los Angeles. So Richard, being a synesthesia expert, as well as an MD and brilliant researcher, went out there and he tested Hockney. So we know Hockney's a synesthete. But he has colored sound and Hockney's now deaf. I wonder what happened to his synesthesia. I've always looked at Hockney's work and I've always loved it. And there are synesthetic things in it that I see. The commonalities are there. Whether synesthetes use these things, if they know about them or not, doesn't matter. It just comes out in your work. When I was painting tools, this is the tool. This is an ice chopper. So it's got a very long, heavy handled piece of wood which was broken off, and you chop the ice for ice fishing. This is the painting. I'm sorry for the reflections. But it's synesthesia. It's all over the place. It's all of these comma shapes, all the marks that are in there. And I didn't realize what I was doing. But those are the Kluber form constants. So the paintings that are being filmed in Orange Sherbet Kisses were tools. Because I was very much interested in tools at the time. I loved the shapes, but not machinery. I just wanted handheld tools, preferably hand-forged tools. I wanted the chi, the spirit of the human in the piece. I didn't want the perfection or the coldness. Peter and I talked about that a lot. One day there was a terrible snowstorm in New York and he was here and I was meeting him. And so I took one of the walking sticks that I make and used it to navigate the snow. And he really responded to it very much.
Oh, it's a walking stick, right? It's very primordial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's tall. It's not a cane, it's a walking stick.
Mhm.
And I put in all the dots. They're drilled. The piece of wood is a very hard, very light wood called moosewood maple. Comes from Canada. And I drilled every hole and filled it with epoxy mixed with black glass.
If you understand what I mean, because these dots, I mean, these holes look like a wooden flute. but it's a disarray. It's like a musical instrument from Salvador Dali's painting. So when you do not understand what's head or tail about the object.
So where do all these things come from? What influences an artist? How do you recognize it in other people's work? You first recognize it in your own. You find the commonalities in your own. So the things that I do, the things that I collect, they all relate to something that's really deep here. It's ineffable too. One tries so hard to explain, and words fail.
Suppose you could meet Vasily Kandinsky in person. What would your first and second question be?
What do you see? What are your triggers? How do you use them? Those would be the first questions. It's like, again, are we the same? Do we see the same things? Do we work with them the same way? Because how you experience something is how you're going to work with it.
Vasily Kandinsky was a little bit more textured and a little bit more pronounced in terms of patterns. David Hockney, I don't know whether it's a conscious decision, but it's like when you decide what you do in art, you decide who you are as an artist. And he decided to be more figurative, though he is a synesthete, but he is more figurative. In your case, why did you decide to concentrate exclusively on this subjective experiences?
For me, texture, surface has always been a major attraction. I can work metal. I have superior training in it. I could make you a silver teapot from sheet metal. When I was a student, I started off as an English major because my mother thought, well, you're going to university, you need a job, so you should be a high school English teacher. That's what you'll be in your lifetime. So they sent me off to school. And in my junior year, just before it, I got called into the dean's office and he said, you know, are you really sure you want to be an English major? And being confronted like that, I swore that that's what I wanted more than anything else on earth, to be an English major. And he said, well, you only have a C average, so think about it. I thought about it. I went back to the dorm because at that time you didn't live in an apartment, you lived in a dorm. And I talked to my roommate. And she said, you know, the counseling center's got these tests. They're interest and ability tests. You should go there and take it and see what you really want to be. I thought that was a good idea. So I went over to the counseling center and I took the tests. Well, I didn't know that the results of the test would be practically instantaneous. And for week after week, I was talking to the counselor about what I should be doing. And finally, I had enough of this. So not knowing the results, I went over to the English department and I said, I want to change my major. Could I have my folders? So they gave me my folders and I walked clear across campus to the art building. And I said, I want to be an art major. Here's my folders. And then I called home and it was a Tuesday. And my parents said, we're going to see you this weekend. You're coming home. So on Friday, I arrived home and they had had enough time to talk to all their friends and relatives. What a terrible idea. Your daughter's going to be an artist. You know she's going to be poor. Did you know that she's going to meet disreputable people? This is a terrible thing. You've got to talk her out of this. So I was prepared for this. And my point of view was if I couldn't be an artist, then I would quit school, I'd get a job and save up enough money until I could continue. Well, I had one uncle, and he said two things. And he was the patriarch of the family. He said, can she teach? Oh, yeah, she could teach art. can she make a product she could sell? Oh yeah, she could do that too. So he said, she has two ways to earn a living. So they said, okay, you can go back, we'll pay for your education, providing that you take a minor in education so that you can get a teaching certificate. Well, when I graduated, I realized that as an art major, I knew nothing. So I started to take classes. And one of the things that happens in life, sometimes bad fortune is good fortune in disguise. You just don't recognize it. So I was taking a sculpture class and I was taking a jewelry class. And I had a problem. I was doing carving, wood carving, and I had a problem with my hand, and it required 2 surgeries. And the doctor for physical therapy after the surgery said, you should pick up a rubber ball and squeeze it to build up the strength in your hand. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. So I picked up a pair of pliers instead. And I discovered that I had talent with metal. Metal and I get along. I can do anything with metal. I can take a sheet of metal and bring it up into a vessel. I can refine gold. I can realloy it to any color or carat that I want. I have these skills. They're hard learned, but I have them. And because I fell in love with metal, my work changed. And then when I went into graduate school, I was not interested in functionality anymore. I wasn't interested in making another silver chalice or making a teaspoon or making a chalice. I wanted sculpture. So my work went into sculpture. And you're never in control of where you're going to end up. You just kind of follow the steps along, and then something changes, some awareness, some knowledge comes to you, and it changes your whole point of view.
How much synesthesia is it in working with metal?
Exactly why I loved it, because I could hide. There is synesthesia here if you know what to look for, which I didn't. But I was hiding because metal doesn't have color. All my colored letters had nothing to do with that. The range of color in metal is you got copper, you got gold, you got brass, you got bronze, you've got aluminum. They're all in this very narrow range until you start getting into the chemical treatment where you patina it and you can get blues and greens and browns and reddish browns. But you're very limited, very, very limited. So I didn't have to deal with color at all. I mean, but there's synesthesia in here, in this. Did I know that? No. It's again the unconscious coming through. So why don't I do figurative work? Because my life took me into this direction. I had the bad fortune of 2 surgeries on my hand. I had a bone that was growing like a bunion. And a rubber ball to squeeze. Why? I could build up my hand strength with pliers.
It reminds me of one of the last essays by Oliver Sacks. I'm not sure that he was a synesthete, but he wrote that he was fascinated with metals when he was a child.
Yeah, he was given the periodic table, something about tungsten. I've read it, but that was a long time ago. I don't think he was a synesthete, but Oliver Sacks had gone to Oxford with Peter Brook. They were like this.
And which of your life choices were determined by your synesthesia, apart from taking up art?
I don't think it was conscious. I think it was the vacuum of knowledge that drove me. Just wanting to know so desperately, why do I see the world differently? And I think questions like that do drive you. But you may not be aware that that is what's happening. Sometimes it's just called fate, things happen. And I go back to what were the choices I made before I reincarnated into this life? What seemed so easy on the other side, which is so hard here.
On the topic of pain, we had an interview many years ago, which was in writing, and you develop this just slightly, I guess. But I want to really emphasize this. So acupuncture, do you do it deliberately to yourself just to experience slight pain and the induced synesthesia related to pain?
No, no. I'll tell you what happened. Before I lived where I am now, in this beautiful loft, which I'm so grateful to be in, for 20 years I lived on a street called the Bowery, which was a place where artists had studios. We had a loft. It was so inexpensive, 2,000 square feet. It didn't have heat to speak of, but it was cheap and it was a big space and it was raw and I could make my art there and I could live there. This building was next door to a manufacturer, and the manufacturer made display cabinets, and he used adhesives and he used paints and he used solvents. And he was on the third floor, and so were we, two buildings next to each other. And there was an air shaft. There were 4 buildings that created this empty space with windows opening to this narrow air shaft. He had an exhaust fan in that air shaft, and in the air shaft, he vented the toxins. I got poisoned. Everybody in the building got poisoned. Everybody in all of the floors of all of the buildings that were open to this air shaft were poisoned. And I thought, what can I do? So I tried Eastern medicine. I tried acupuncture. And the acupuncturist was able to help me. My acupuncturist knew what was wrong, knew how to help. In the acupuncture, when I'm lying on a futon and I'm stuck full of pins looking like a human porcupine, I didn't tell her for months that I was seeing colors. And finally, I couldn't stand it anymore, and I just told her. And she said, you know that the acupuncture points were first found by their colors? Did I go to acupuncture because I knew that I would see colors? Just the reverse. I went to acupuncture because I was dying.
Yes. And the opposite. Richard was was insisting on the point that synesthesia is euphoric. I do not remember the exact word, but euphoric was something that I remember. So, to you personally, I mean, going to the bottom of things, is synesthesia, your synesthesia, emotional and pleasurable overall?
Not always, because everything I see is not necessarily beautiful. Hearing karaoke and the colors makes me stick my fingers in my ears and run away from the sound as fast as I could possibly escape it. Some things are just not worth paying attention to. The sound of the dentist drill causes me, with my eyes shut tight, to see this chrome orange. Do I dislike chrome orange? No, I like chrome orange. I like orange, but I don't like seeing it because the dentist is drilling one of my teeth. Thank you very much. I'm not a masochist, and I hate dentists, but that's a different story. I don't remember Richard saying that it was euphoric. I remember him saying it was noetic, because when you have an experience, you know you had it. There's no question about that. Noetic. Sometimes what I see is so beautiful that I get very excited. I run home from what I've seen in acupuncture to paint a fraction of what it is, because you're watching a movie. How do you condense a movie into one still frame, which is what a canvas is? It's hard.
You've traveled quite much. Mm, Does your synesthesia behave differently from place to place, from country to country?
Not necessarily. The things that trigger it are still the same triggers. What I often wonder is if I spent time in another place in the country, would the experiences I have there, would it change my art? And the answer is probably yes, it would. But having not done it particularly, except for the 8 weeks I spent at the McDowell, I don't know. But I find that I pay attention to things a little bit differently, like watching the solar eclipse here last week, looking at shadows and seeing that shadows were in extreme detail, always silhouetted, of course, but you could see if you had a hair sticking out in the shadow, it would be there, just highly detailed. I remember what we saw in New York was 90%. It wasn't totality, and totality is a whole different thing because I've experienced it. I was in Detroit, where I grew up, and it was in the 70s, and there was a total solar eclipse there. And I remember that the birds stopped singing and the wind stopped, and the temperature fell, and the shadows were exquisite, and I felt a sadness, a discomfort. It was palpable, and I was very happy when the sun came back. And I wondered, this must be what our ancestors felt when they didn't know what an eclipse was, just experienced it. Terrifying. Knowledge helps, takes the fear away. But to be in another country, to be in another place, if you're paying attention, if you're sensitive to what's going on around you, it's got to change you. How it would change my synesthesia, I don't know. My experience has been the triggers are the same. Would I find different triggers? Would I have other synesthetic perceptions? I don't know. It's a fair question.
You are the visionary behind the American Synesthesia Association. So, what was the most exciting and challenging about first establishing and then shepherding our ASA all throughout these years?
Validation for me and for others. To know that you're not alone, to be able to take your knowledge and share it with other people, to give it, to love it, and change their worlds too. We're herd animals. We don't want to be alone, most of us. We want to connect with other people. We need other people, all of us. So when you can help somebody, it's the greatest feeling in the world. What did I want in return? Nothing. That's not why I'm here. It's just, can I make life easier for somebody else?
When did you first feel or understand that people's attitudes started changing about synesthesia?
I remember meeting a Black man at my university who had synesthesia, and he didn't want to talk about it. He was afraid. He didn't want to be identified. He thought somehow being different would disable him in some way. People would think less of him. When the musicians started to come forward and talk about it, that's when I knew it had changed. Because people were now proud of it. Not ashamed, not hiding, not thinking I'm different, therefore something is wrong. They're saying, I have it. And then other people come along and say, well, I think I have it too. You're not so special. I got it too. That's when I knew things had changed. When people were coming forward. And the visual artists, not so much. The musicians, for sure. They're all over the place.
You seem to be at odds with science. Well, at least I can just infer this from this talk for various reasons. Well, probably just science is not ripe enough and ready enough for the issues, for the questions that you've started asking. But at events such as the Oxford conference that will take place this May, scientists report more and more discoveries about synesthesia. Such conferences and the scientists that present their results and outcomes there, do you agree with all of them? Are they all about you?
I think the question is, do I understand most of them? I am not a scientist. I've discovered something wonderful with ChatGPT. I can take somebody's paper that I don't understand because I don't understand, one, the jargon, and number two, I don't understand the concepts. And I can put it in ChatGPT and say, put this in plain English, and it will. And I can say, oh my God, I understand what the hell they're talking about, finally. So to agree or disagree first is predicated on, do I understand what the hell they're talking about? In many cases, I don't have a clue. But with ChatGPT, I'm catching up. I don't have a background in science. I have a background in arts. And for me, I'm always in a constant state of translation anyway. I mean, the synesthetic perception comes first. So then you have to translate that into, what they're talking about, and then understand what the concepts are that are driving the words they're choosing to use. And if you don't have a background in neuroscience, neurology, history, psychology, anthropology, you're always playing catch up. You're always trying to figure out. I mean, I have my own questions based on my own observations. I love the scientists because they have answers. And I don't have the time to take a graduate degree in psychology, neuroscience, neurology, anatomy, history, theology. I don't have the time. I just have these questions. And so I go to the scientists whom I dearly love because you give me knowledge, and knowledge is freedom. Yeah. When I send emails out to people and I say, look, we've got people from so many different fields and each field has its own vocabulary. Please don't use the jargon because you come and you wish to share your knowledge. If you use your jargon, we won't follow. We won't get your knowledge. Please don't use it. Put it in plain English. We want to understand you. I am not the only one. I'm not the only one. And it's like, sometimes these people, well, people send in abstracts. I put the abstract in ChatGPT when it's full of jargon. I say, put it in plain English. And I go, oh, yeah, okay. That's what you're talking about. Gotcha.
You teach art, you teach digital art at a college. And how do you explain to your students, if you do, And what do they understand from you about synesthesia when you mention this phenomenon in class?
Well, the first thing I want to know is, do I have any students that are synesthetes? The answer is generally yes. I generally have one. And oftentimes they're very young, they've never heard of it, they don't know that they're different, and you get that deer frozen in the headlight look of when I was a kid, we had blackboards, white chalk. Now we have whiteboards and colored markers. And I know that if I put a letter or a number in the wrong color, the synesthete is going to be slowed down. It's microseconds, but they're slowed down. So I know not to do that. Synesthetes generally are better artists than the rest of the class. They see the world differently. They're more original. They don't know what the hell they're doing. That's not the point. The point is that they've got a gift. And I can see it almost instantly. I can see it. Sometimes they'll do a piece, and you have to understand that I teach both old school and new school. I teach actual drawing. I teach actual painting. And I also teach digitally, both, and then try somehow to integrate it. I talk about synesthesia because I need to know if I'm dealing with somebody in my class. I want to reach my students. And if there's a synesthete there, I know I have to approach things a little differently. In the meantime, the rest of the class discovers that not everybody sees the world the same way that they do. And that's the first lesson that you want to teach anyone who's studying the arts. We all see it differently. And you have to be open to it and try to understand how somebody sees something. Because if you're going into the graphic arts, that means you're going into what we call advertising. And advertising is selling. And selling is telling. And telling is sometimes with pictures and sometimes with colors. So you end up in the field of physiology. How do humans react to colors? What colors do they see first? If you wanted to attract somebody's attention, what colors should you use? If you wanted to give the appearance of being serious, what color would you wear? What color would you wear if you wanted to diffuse someone who's angry at you? Because there are things that people respond to in terms of color. So I bring up synesthesia, I bring up physiology, I bring up chemistry, I bring up biology, I bring up everything I possibly can to broaden somebody's point of view, because you are trying to reach an audience that you have no control over. So the first thing you have to do is you have to know everything about your audience that you possibly can. Who are they? What do they like? What's going to attract them? And then give them those things.
My impression is this, at least I got it from the Russian synesthesia community. I'm sure that there is something similar in the USA, that new generations of synesthetes take their phenomenon so trivially, so, informatively, in terms of knowledge. They know about synesthesia so much that it's no longer magic. And I see fewer and fewer young people in our ranks. At least there is a kind of a age barrier. And well, apart from scientists, I can see fewer and fewer young people at conferences, and fewer because it's there, it's in the Wikipedia. So you just open it up and read. What new can you tell me about? So what's your impression? It's through my effort, through your effort, that synesthesia stopped being a curiosity and became just one of the things about yourself. So do you have the same impression that new generation of synesthetes are becoming less interested in synesthesia?
No, I don't. I still find people coming forward and saying, I've had this my whole life. I didn't know there was a name for it. You've got kind of like these two ends of the age spectrum. You've got the very, very young, whose parents are protecting them from the internet. And you've got the very old. And the very old, they've maybe had it their whole life and they're not computer savvy. And they're not going to go there and they're not going to find that knowledge because they don't know how to access it. I get emails from parents all the time. And their kids, generally 13, 14 years old. They have synesthesia and they don't know if this is a good thing or not. And they're worried. And you talk to the synesthetes themselves, these young kids with their parents in the background, and you help them to understand what gift they have and how they might think about working with it and that it's really cool. And they're as excited as I was when I first found out the name synesthesia. I send them books, I send them articles, I send them lists of famous synesthetes. I tell them about different organizations. I tell them about Sean's synesthesia list. I tell them about the social media groups on Facebook, the synesthesia tree, and they're just so grateful. I don't find a callousness or there's no magic here. But maybe it's the age at which I'm reaching them through their parents who contact the ASA and say, my daughter, my son. I still find the magic is there.
Carol, you have walked me so beautifully and gracefully through the path of your life. So I've got such a warm impression and feeling that I was so welcomed. And I've listened to the most beautiful and humane story that probably I've listened in all my life. Just last question. With all these GPT things, with genetic engineering, there is so much transformation about what's true, what's kind, what's evil, what's wrong. What might be the next big step, you think, in raising awareness across the world about synesthesia, and what's the value of raising awareness about such things in this troubled world?
There was an age about 40, 50 years ago called behaviorism in psychology, and they said that everybody's the same. Everybody who's the same is normal. If you're above normal, a genius, well, you're not like us, so you're suspect. God help you if you were below normal. You know, you were just out of the running entirely. So Einstein, nobody understood, but Einstein was a genius, but he's not like us. We want to be with people who are like us, and with synesthesia, you're not, you're different. So how do you recognize diversity? And one of the things that's coming up a lot now is neurodiversity. And I have a problem with synesthesia being neurodiverse, but lumped in with things like autism, dyslexia, TD. I think you have to have diversity within neurodiversity. And I know a lot of people are trying to put synesthesia in the neurodiverse camp. It could have some side effects. When synesthesia was first talked about, people would describe it as a condition, or worse, they would describe it as a disorder. And we didn't want it to be thought of as negative. The problem with anybody who's on the autism spectrum, and it's a huge range, is that's not a good thing. to lump synesthesia, which I think is a good thing, and with something that isn't a good thing, what are the consequences of doing that? I don't know, but I'm a little bit scared of it. In terms of autism, I know a great deal about it. Why? Because there's autism in my family. It's one of the reasons that Carter and I decided not to have children. My mother was autistic. And growing up with an autistic mother, it was hard for her, it was hard for the family, it was hard for me. And your mother teaches you social skills. My mother had no social skills she couldn't teach me. I learned over the years. I made countless mistakes. To hook synesthesia into the neurodivergent world with autism is for me difficult. It's problematic. I don't know what to do about it. To say you're different from everybody else in the world and that's okay, people are not going to accept it. People are going to accept that the things that they can understand. Synesthesia is difficult. My whole life has been difficult. To get it to a point where people are thinking it's a good thing has taken my life and the lives of so many other people. Sean, James Wanerton, you, Anina, Daphne, Larry Marks, Richard, countless people who have been putting our effort forward to saying different doesn't mean bad. So your question of how do you integrate the differences that all people have? It's tricky. You're walking on the razor's edge. Well, some differences are good to have and some differences are bad to have. It's okay to have red hair. It's okay to be blonde. It's okay to have black hair. Skin color, that's a different story. I mean, people split hairs all the time. All I can do is say, I'm aware of it. I don't have a solution. I don't even know that I have all the questions. I have some questions. God knows I don't have a solution. But I'm aware of it. And I think the only thing that we can do is open a dialogue about it and see, how do different people feel? Where should we go with this? What should we do? I don't have a solution. I only have questions. How can we make it better for people who are, let's say, autistic? How could we have made it better for my mother? There are so many misunderstandings. There are so many assumptions. And there are so many people who have experienced it, either as being autistic themselves or having a relation who was. Nothing has been done to explore these things, and it's an excellent opportunity. But before you put synesthesia in the neurodiverse world, I think the consequences of it need to be addressed. And maybe the addressing of them is just the questions that people have, starting with, is this a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How can we do something? I mean, the whole idea of trying to open the door and the inclusion of people has to be based on knowledge. And right now, there isn't any. The question is the heart and soul of the issue. And I haven't had much time to deal with that. I haven't had much time to think about it. I certainly don't know enough about how to deal with it. Yeah, because when you've spent 73 years of your life dealing with rejection, the fear that the rejection is just coming back in a different form is real. How do you avoid it? How do you work with it? How do you mitigate the negative effects. How do you live in a world that still wants people to answer the question, do you see what I see? And if you see what I see, then we can be friends.